I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American family walked in at 11 p.m. The dad immediately started talking at full volume about how excited they were to explore the city. I mean, he wasn't just talking, he was practically shouting. Every other guest in the lobby turned to stare. I politely asked him to lower his voice because it was quiet hours. He looked at me like I'd asked him to stop breathing. Quiet hours? It's a hotel lobby, not a library. I explained that in the Netherlands, after 10 p.m., we keep noise down out of respect for other guests. He shook his head and said, "Back home, hotels are 24/7. People come and go whenever." I nodded and said yes, but this is Amsterdam, not America. Che reluctantly lowered his voice, but I could tell he thought the whole concept was ridiculous. The next morning, that same family came down for breakfast. The mom filled her plate, sat down, and immediately asked me where the syrup was. I told her we don't typically have syrup at breakfast. She looked confused. "No syrup? How do you eat pancakes?" I explained that Dutch pancakes are different. They're thinner, more like crepes, and we eat them with powdered sugar or fruit. She stared at me for a solid 5 seconds. Then she said, "That's not breakfast, that's dessert." I tried not to laugh. She ended up putting Nutella on everything and calling it a day. Later that week, I helped another American guest who wanted to rent a bike. Simple enough. I gave him the basics. Stay in the bike lane. Watch for trams. Follow the flow of traffic. He nodded along. 20 minutes later, he came back completely flustered. "Why is everyone yelling at me?" I asked what happened. He said he was biking on the sidewalk because the bike lane looked too crowded. I closed my eyes for a second. In Amsterdam, biking on the sidewalk is basically a crime. Pedestrians will yell at you. Locals will glare. You might even get fined. I explained this to him. He said, "But I was just trying to be safe." I told him the safest thing he could do was follow the rules everyone else follows. He looked genuinely shocked that there was a wrong way to bike. And then there was the guy who asked me if he could pay in dollars. Not as a joke. He was serious. I told him no, we use euros here. He sighed and said, "I thought everyone just took dollars." I asked him where he got that idea. He shrugged. "I don't know. Movies, I guess?" I handed him directions to the nearest ATM. He walked away, muttering about how inconvenient Europe was. That's when I realized a lot of Americans don't fail abroad because they're careless. They fail because they genuinely expect the rest of the world to work exactly like home, and when it doesn't, they're completely unprepared. I track these patterns across dozens of cities because someone has to document how culture actually works, not how tourists think it should. If you want the real preparation, not the sanitized guidebook version, subscribe. I publish these field reports weekly. I have a friend who works at a train station in Munich. She told me about an American tourist who missed his train because he didn't validate his ticket. In Germany, you have to stamp your ticket at a small machine before you board. It's a trust-based system. No turnstiles, no gates, just you and your responsibility. This guy bought his ticket online, printed it out, and walked straight onto the platform. When the conductor came around, he showed his ticket proudly. The conductor looked at it and said, "This isn't validated." The American was confused. "What do you mean?" "I bought it." The conductor explained that buying it isn't enough. You have to stamp it at the machine. The guy got frustrated. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" My friend said the instructions were on the ticket. He hadn't read them. He ended up paying a fine and missing his connection. He spent the rest of the day complaining about how complicated German trains were. Another time, my cousin in Paris watched an American couple try to hail a taxi by stepping into the street and waving their arms like they were flagging down a bus. In Paris, you don't just wave at random taxis. You go to a taxi stand or call one. The couple stood there for 10 minutes, getting more and more annoyed. Cars honked. Drivers yelled. They finally gave up and walked to a nearby cafe. My cousin overheard the husband say, "Paris has the worst taxi service I've ever seen." She almost said something, but decided it wasn't worth it. They clearly had no idea how the system worked. I worked at a hostel in Barcelona for a summer. One afternoon, an American guy checked in and immediately asked where he could find a good burrito place. I told him Barcelona is known for tapas, paella, seafood, not burritos. He looked disappointed. "So there's no Mexican food here?" I said there might be a few places, but it's not common. He said, "That's weird. We have Spanish food everywhere in the States." Iki didn't know how to explain that Spanish food and Mexican food are not the same thing. Hee-ha. Ended up eating at McDonald's most of the trip. Then there was the woman who came to the front desk upset because her room didn't have air conditioning. I explained that most older buildings in Barcelona don't have AC. We have fans, and it cools down at night. She wasn't satisfied. How do people survive without AC? I told her that for most of the year it's not an issue. She said, "Well, I'm from Arizona. I need AC." I offered her a fan. She took it. But she left a bad review online saying the hostel was uninhabitable. It was May. The temperature outside was 22 degrees Celsius. A bartender in Dublin told me about an American who ordered a Guinness and then complained it took too long. In Ireland, pouring a proper Guinness takes time. You pour it in 2 stages and let it settle. It's part of the experience. This guy didn't care. He said, "Back home, beer comes fast." The bartender calmly explained the process. The guy still wasn't happy. He said, "I'm paying for this. It should be quick." The bartender just stared at him. Eventually, the Guinness was ready. The guy took 1 sip and said, "It's warm." The bartender explained that Irish beer isn't served ice-cold like American beer. The guy left without finishing it. The bartender said it was the most disrespectful thing he'd seen in years. My sister studied abroad in Italy. She told me about a classmate who got into an argument with a restaurant owner in Florence. The classmate wanted to order cappuccino after dinner. The owner politely said, "We don't serve cappuccino after 11 a.m. The classmate got defensive. "Why not? It's just coffee." The owner explained that in Italy, cappuccino is a breakfast drink. After meals, you have espresso. The classmate said, "That's a stupid rule." The owner's face went cold. He said, "It's not a rule, it's culture." The classmate didn't get her cappuccino. She spent the rest of the night complaining about how rigid Italians were. My sister was mortified. I met a guy in London who worked at a pub. He told me about an American tourist who got upset because the bartender didn't immediately take his order. In British pubs, you don't wait for table service at the bar. You go up and order yourself. This guy sat at a table near the bar for 20 minutes, waving his hand, trying to get attention. Finally, the bartender walked over and said, "Mate, you have to come to the bar." The American was annoyed. "Why didn't you just come over?" The bartender said, "Because that's not how it works here." The guy muttered something about bad service and left. The bartender said it happens at least once a week. And then there was the American couple in Prague who tried to tip 25% at every meal. In Czech Republic, tipping exists, but it's usually around 10%, and it's included in the bill sometimes. The couple didn't know this. They kept leaving massive tips. One waiter actually chased them down to return the money, thinking they made a mistake. They insisted it was correct. The waiter looked confused, but took it. Later, they told other tourists that Prague was so cheap because their meals cost nothing. They didn't realize. They were just over-tipping everywhere. I was giving a walking tour in Edinburgh when an American tourist asked me if Scotland was near London. I paused. I said, Scotland is part of Great Britain, but it's about 400 miles north of London. She looked surprised. Oh, I thought it was like a suburb. I didn't know what to say. Another person on the tour, a local, just shook his head. Later, the same woman asked if we spoke Scottish here. I explained that we speak English, but with a Scottish accent, and some people speak Scots or Gaelic, she said. So it's like a dialect? I said sort of, but it's more complicated. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't really get it. Another tour guide I know in Athens told me about an American who thought Greece and Rome were the same place. She asked him, so when did Rome become Greece? He was stunned. He explained that they were always separate. Greece is a country. Rome is a city in Italy, she said. But they both have old buildings, right? He said yes, but that doesn't make them the same. She seemed embarrassed, but also genuinely confused. He said it happens more often than people think. My friend worked at a museum in Berlin. An American visitor asked her, "Is this where the wall was?" She said yes. Parts of the Berlin Wall are still standing. He said, "Cool. So this is where World War II happened?" She corrected him. The Berlin Wall was Cold War, not World War II. He said, "Same thing, right?" She took a deep breath and explained the 40-year difference. He said, "Well, they're both about Germany." She gave up. She told me later that she's stopped being surprised by these questions. I met someone who works at a bookstore in Dublin. An American tourist came in asking for books about the Irish War. The employee asked which one. Ireland has a complicated history. There's the War of Independence, the Civil War, the Troubles. The tourist said, "I don't know. The one with England." The employee asked if he meant the War of Independence. The tourist said, "Sure, that sounds right." The employee handed him a book. The tourist flipped through it and said, "Wait, this was in the 1900s? I thought it was like medieval times." The employee just nodded and walked away. A tour guide in Amsterdam told me about a group of Americans who thought Anne Frank's house was from the 1800s. When she corrected them and said it was World War II, one of them said, "That recent?" She said yes, the 1940s. They seemed shocked. One of them said, "I thought World War II was way older than that." She asked how old they thought it was. They guessed, like 100 years ago. She said, "It was 80 years ago." They went quiet. She said it was a sobering moment for everyone. Sainaf have a cousin who worked at a visitor center in Paris. An American asked him if the Eiffel Tower was original or a replica. My cousin didn't understand the question. At first, the guy clarified, "Like, is this the real one, or did they rebuild it?" My cousin said it's the original, built in 1889. The guy said, "Wow, I thought it was newer." My cousin asked why. The guy said, "It just looks so clean." My cousin didn't know how to respond. Apparently, the guy thought anything that old would be falling apart. Another friend in Rome dealt with an American tourist who asked if the Colosseum was always a tourist attraction. She explained that no, it was built as an amphitheater for gladiator fights and public events. The tourist said, "So, it's like ancient Disneyland?" She said, "Not exactly." He insisted, "But people went there for entertainment, right?" She said yes, but it was also brutal and violent. He shrugged. "Still sounds like a theme park, too." Me. She ended the conversation there. I worked with someone in Vienna who told me about an American who thought Austria and Australia were related. He asked, "So is this near Sydney?" She said no, Austria is in Europe. Australia is a continent on the other side of the world. He laughed, embarrassed. "I always get those mixed up." She said it's a common mistake. He said, "Yeah, they should have picked different names." She didn't have the heart to tell him that Austria existed first. Then there was the American in Barcelona, who asked a local if they spoke Mexican here. The local said, "We speak Spanish and Catalan." The American said, "Same thing, right?" The local said, "No, Catalan is a completely different language." The American looked doubtful. "But you're in Spain, so it's Spanish." The local explained that Catalonia has its own language and culture. The American said, "That's confusing." The local agreed, but for different reasons. My friend in Brussels had an American ask if Belgium was the capital of Europe. She said, "No, Brussels is the capital of Belgium, but it's also where the European Union headquarters are located." The American said, "So it's like the European Washington, D.C.? She said, "Kind of, yes." He seemed satisfied with that. Then he asked, "Do you guys use the euro or the pound?" She said the euro. He said, "I thought all of Europe used pounds." She explained that only the UK used the pound, and they're not in the EU anymore. He said, "This is too complicated." She handed him a tourism map and wished him luck. I was working at a cafe in Copenhagen when an American couple came in and sat down. They waited and waited. After about 10 minutes, the woman waved me over, annoyed. "Are you going to take our order?" I said, "You have to order at the counter." She looked at the counter, then back at me. "Why?" I explained that in Denmark, most cafes work this way. "You order, you pay, you sit," she said. "That's so inconvenient." I just smiled. They got up, ordered, and sat back down. The husband muttered, "No wonder service is so slow here." A friend in Stockholm told me about an American who complained that everything closes too early. In Sweden, most shops close by 6 or 7 p.m. The American was outraged. How do people shop after work? My friend explained that Swedes value work-life balance. Shops close so employees can go home. The American said, "But what about customers?" My friend said, "Customers plan ahead." The American didn't like that answer, he said. "In the States, stores are open 24/7. My friend said, "Yes, and workers are exhausted." The conversation ended there. I met someone who worked at a pharmacy in Germany. An American came in asking for Tylenol. The employee said they don't carry Tylenol, but they have paracetamol, which is the same thing. The American was confused. "Why do you call it something different?" The employee explained that Tylenol is a brand name. Paracetamol is the actual drug. The American said, "That's confusing." The employee said, "It's the same in America. You just don't realize it." The American bought it, but he still seemed unsure. Another American in London went to a grocery store and tried to buy loose vegetables without weighing them first. In UK supermarkets, you have to weigh your produce and print a price sticker before you get to the checkout. He didn't know this. When he got to the register, the cashier asked for the sticker. He said, "What sticker?" She explained the process. He got annoyed. "Why don't you just weigh it here?" She said, "That's not how it works." He had to go back and weigh everything. The line behind him was not happy. My sister in Spain told me about an American roommate who tried to do laundry at midnight. In Spanish apartments, you don't run loud appliances late at night. It's common courtesy. The neighbors knocked on the door within minutes. My sister had to explain the unwritten rule. The roommate said, "But I have to do laundry sometime." My sister said, "Yes, during the day." The roommate thought it was ridiculous. She said, "No one cares when you do laundry in America." My sister said, "Well, people care here." A guy I know in Switzerland worked at a hardware store. An American tourist came in asking for measurements in feet and inches. The employee said, "We use metric here." The American said, "Can you convert it for me?" The employee pulled out a calculator and did the math. The American watched and said, "Why don't you just use feet?" "It's easier," the employee said. For you, maybe. The American bought what he needed but kept complaining. The DB employee told me it was the longest transaction of his week. Then there was the American in France who got frustrated because no one smiled at strangers on the street. In the US, smiling at people you pass is normal. In France, it's weird. This guy kept smiling at everyone. People looked at him strangely. He thought they were rude. A local finally told him, "We don't smile for no reason." The guy said, "It's just being friendly." The local said, "It's strange." The guy gave up. He told other tourists that Parisians were cold. Most travel content won't tell you this. They'll sell you Paris as magical. Not complicated. I don't do that. I show you the unwritten rules that separate tourists from travelers. If that distinction matters to you, you know where the subscribe button is. I met a woman who managed an Airbnb in Portugal. An American guest asked her, "Why is the shower so small?" She said, "It's a standard European bathroom." The guest said, "Well, it's tiny." The woman explained that space is limited in older buildings. The guest said, "You should renovate." The woman just nodded. Later, the guest left a review saying the apartment was outdated. The woman wasn't surprised. Another story came from a friend in Norway. An American asked why there were no free refills at restaurants. My friend explained that free refills aren't a thing in Europe. You pay for each drink. The American said, "That's a scam." My friend said, "It's just how it works." The American insisted it was a scam. My friend stopped arguing. The American ended up paying for 4 sodas and complained the entire time. A co-worker in Italy told me about an American who tried to take food to go from a sit-down restaurant. In Italy, meals are meant to be enjoyed at the table. Taking food to go is uncommon, especially at nicer places. The American asked for a to-go box. The waiter said they don't do that. The American got upset. "Why not? I paid for it." The waiter explained the cultural difference. The American said, "That's wasteful." The waiter wrapped it up reluctantly. But you could tell he wasn't happy. And then there was the American in Japan who didn't take off his shoes when entering someone's home. In Japan, this is a huge no-no. Shoes come off at the door. Always. This guy walked right in, shoes on. The host was too polite to say anything immediately. But later, a mutual friend had to explain. The American was embarrassed. He said, "I didn't know." The friend said, "That's why you ask." The American never forgot that moment. I was back at that hotel in Amsterdam a few months later. A new American guest checked in. He was polite, asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. When I explained quiet hours, he said, "That makes sense." When I told him about the bike lanes, he said, "I'll be careful." When I mentioned that we use euros, he already had them ready. I was genuinely impressed. I asked him if he'd been to Europe before. He said no, but he did research. He read blogs, watched videos, asked friends for advice. He said, "I didn't want to be that guy." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You know, the American who expects everything to be like home." I laughed. I told him that, unfortunately, he was in the minority. Most people show up unprepared. They assume the world runs on American rules. When it doesn't, they get frustrated. He said, "That's kind of embarrassing." I agreed. But I also told him it's not just Americans. Every country has tourists who do this. It just so happens that Americans are often the loudest about it. He asked me what the most common mistake was. I thought about it. I said, "Probably assuming that being a tourist gives you a pass to ignore local customs." He nodded. I continued, "People think that because they're visiting, the rules don't apply to them. But locals don't care if you're a tourist. They expect you to make an effort." He said, "That's fair." The next day, I saw him biking through the city, staying in the bike lane, following the flow. He waved at me as he passed. It was a small thing, but it felt like progress. I thought about all the stories I'd collected over the years, the missed trains, the unvalidated tickets, the loud voices during quiet hours, the confusion over measurements, currencies, and customs. Most of it could have been avoided with just a little bit of research, or even just a little bit of humility. The thing is, traveling abroad isn't just about seeing new places, it's about recognizing that the world doesn't revolve around you. Every country has its own logic, its own systems, its own way of doing things. And when you visit, you're a guest, guests adapt. They learn, they respect. They don't demand that everyone else change to make them comfortable. I've seen Americans thrive abroad. I've seen them learn languages, embrace weird customs, and laugh at their own mistakes. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen entitlement, frustration, and a stubborn refusal to adapt. And honestly, it's the difference between a good trip and a disaster. So if you're planning to travel, do yourself a favor. Read up, ask questions, be open, and for the love of everything, validate your train ticket. Trust me, these stories never stop coming. And I'll be here, watching it all unfold, one confused tourist at a time. These stories never stop coming. But the people who subscribe, they're the ones who show up prepared, not confused. I'll keep documenting the disasters either way, but if you'd rather be 3 steps ahead than 3 mistakes behind, subscribe. I publish this level of cultural breakdown every single week.